Hi Joe, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you.
Happy to discover your work here in your first exhibition at Xavier Hufkens. Maybe I'll start off with a very specific question. The title of the exhibition is New Paltz. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. New Paltz is the name of a small town, maybe 100 miles north of New York City in upstate New York. I think I was driving around up there and I maybe drove by a sign and I liked the way it looked and I wrote it down and then it ended up on a list of titles. Yeah, it doesn't really mean anything.
Okay, that's interesting.
But it does, I was thinking, it's when I started sort of consolidating the group of paintings that became this show, I had an idea that there was going to be some sort of rural, laid-back, kind of pastoral sort of feeling to the show. And I'm not really sure if that ended up coming off or not, but the title stuck anyway.
So that's how it evolved, basically. You knew that there was a show coming, or you were still working at specific works, because it's very clear that they all originate from the same time frame. They were maybe also created simultaneously. There are two different questions.
I think I started working on this group of paintings in 2020 or maybe late 19, and I think I started like 30 or 40 paintings. I went through this kind of, I was working really hard but not really going too deep into it. Like I'd kind of get the ball rolling on a picture and then put it aside. And then the COVID disaster thing happened and all of that work got rolled up and put into storage for over a year. So there was this kind of unusual pause. And then when I got back to studio, I had all of this half-finished work to kind of pick up on. So it was a very unusual set of circumstances that I imagine will never happen again.
Yeah, but did you enjoy it?
Did I enjoy the process
of... Taking a pause maybe from...
It was actually quite interesting, because rather than starting with a blank slate, so to speak, there was some sort of something there to respond to. There's something about that kind of improvisation happening slowly over time that I think you get an effect that it would be impossible to achieve in a day or a week or something like this. I need to feel some distance to the work so I feel comfortable, almost like defacing it in a way, so I can go in and I don't feel attached to it. Or
how do you decide when a painting is finished?
It's almost arbitrary in a way, and sometimes I wonder what I'll keep egging myself on, and then there are times when, if you take little snapshots in the studio, I'll look at a photo of a painting that's long gone and think like, wow, that was kind of fine. Like, why did I have to fuck around with that for another 6 months or whatever,
So you do take photos in the process of painting?
Yeah,
okay, that's interesting.
I do. I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And sometimes if I'm working on something and particularly thinking about it, I'll take a little picture on the phone and like maybe check in on it,
Yeah,
like at night or something.
Yeah, before sleeping, swiping through the labor of the day.
Yeah, and that's weird because it's like the phone is of course such an awful little distraction tugging on your sleeve, but that is one cool thing about it is you can somehow seeing a painting in that kind of postage stamp size is weirdly helpful. Like you get a sort of general kind of view of the thing compositionally, and it's kind of helpful. Yeah.
At one point in another interview, you said something like you have to suppress your ego to really paint. I don't know if you remember saying that, but I thought it was very interesting because it feels like a paradox when you see how intuitively and organically you paint But then again, it makes sense, as we said before, like the paintings become detached from you as a maker. But I was also wondering about that, since your work is quite easily connected to this tradition of abstract expressionism as well, but then again, they are at the same time very distant towards the viewer, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly with that tradition, as you mentioned, of like the New York school, there's this image we have of usually a male, very high testosterone sort of character who's in charge of the situation. and you know, we love these guys, of course, but yeah, I don't, my experience is that I don't feel like a little drill sergeant who's sort of ordering, you know, ordering the paint around and bending things to my own will. It feels like it's quite the opposite. I mean, I couldn't have sketched out the paintings in this show to you a year ago. You know, they appear to me more or less as they appear to a stranger walking into the gallery.
Zooming into the way of working, because it's all the paintings, and specifically we'll talk about the drawings later. The paintings show, as I said, this process of gestures, I guess, like mark making. You add paint, you take some away. You told me, and I also read that you work often with the canvas first lying on the floor, then sometimes on the wall as well. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about these different gestures, if I can call them that way?
There were years when I was working almost exclusively with the painting flat on the floor. There is a kind of freedom that one gets from working in that format, because you don't have the opportunity to sort of stand back and look at it like you look at a painting and think of composition and does this sort of jibe with that, or so there's kind of a freedom to it, and it also, working on something flat in a horizontal position, to me feels closer to drawing. I always associate drawing with you working on a table or something like this, whereas when something is upright and pinned to the wall or an easel or something, that feels like painting. And it's a different, something about the way your body moves in those two distinct activities triggers a different sort of state of consciousness, I think.
Then maybe I would like to address the drawings as well.
Yeah, I think at a certain point in my life as an artist, I was making drawings that felt a little more formal, and they were more related to paintings, and but I was also making drawings at home, like at the kitchen table and this sort of thing. And I looked at them, and at a certain point I thought, well, why aren't these my drawings? Like, there's the drawings that I show people, and then there are these drawings that are kind of weirder and usually don't really have a lot to do with what I'm doing in studio, but they felt somehow more authentic and more interesting. So at a certain point I thought, well, I'm just going to start showing these are my drawings. And I guess my policy with them is that anything goes, you know, like I'll draw something out of my imagination, or I'll draw something that's derived from some source material, or it can be figurative or cartoonish, or, yeah. And sometimes I think that the drawings are kind of like, they're out ahead of the paintings a little bit, and that allowing myself that kind of fluidity in the drawings, I hope kind of eggs the paintings on in a way. I do have this desire to kind of merge these two projects. Yeah. Like if I kind of visualize what I think the painting might look like in a few years, it probably would have more in common with the drawings that I'm making. Like more figuration, more...
It's a nice idea to opening that door. I think you told me yesterday it's also the first time that the drawings and the paintings are presented in the same space.
I think so.
Yeah. It's nice to see them in a confrontation. It's almost like they come from another artist, or...
I mean, sometimes I think it's just that the stakes are so low in drawing. You know, it's just a pencil and a piece of paper, that it's like, if I think to myself, I'm going to make a drawing of a cow, it's like, it's easy to do. But then, like, to go through the formality of making a painting of a cow, at a certain point you might think, like, this is this is ridiculous. You know? Yeah.
Maybe finally I would like to go back to the studio. I feel in your work, but also talking to you and getting to know you better, that the studio really is, as is for any artist working in a studio, of course, but then specifically there are some traces of the studio that are so detectable on the paintings.
I often think, like, what a luxury it is to have a studio, and I think, like, I feel kind of like bad for people who don't have, like, a big empty room to hang out in.
So it's a big empty room at this point.
I mean, now it's sort of empty, but or just to have, it's, you know, it's a place to go and sort of think and not think, and to be quiet, and
Yeah, I think any time I will see your paintings after this encounter, I will probably always visualize you, you know, spending time in the studio. You kind of sense it in the works that they took their time to appear, and that there is this idea of time and labor and reflection and stepping back, and I think that's one of the biggest qualities of the paintings, is that they, in some way, they immediately demand also time from you as a viewer to look at them and to appreciate also the time that you took to make them. Yeah.
I appreciate that read, and I had a funny image of. So I was trying to think of a parallel to what it's like to be working in studio, and I thought of like a night watchman, like one of those people who sits in a chair, and there are all those televisions with like different, and they kind of sit there and look, and then if something seems suspicious, you might get up and do something.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is just kind of like, you know, keeping an eye out for trouble or whatever.
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.